Before you were born, a being declared himself God, and the entire world believed him. But the ancient Gnostics discovered his name, his throne, and the exact method he used to make humanity forget the truth. And they buried that knowledge before it could reach you. Hidden inside texts sealed beneath Egyptian desert sands for over 1,600 years lies a story so radical it was branded heresy the moment it was written. If you are ready to remember what was taken from you, subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Imagine a being of immense power sitting upon a throne constructed not from divine love, but from arrogance, ignorance, and an insatiable hunger for worship. A being who looked out across a vast and empty cosmos, saw no one above him, and in that moment of blindness made a declaration that would echo through every civilization, every religion, and every human soul for thousands of years. He said, "I am God, I am the only God. There is no other before me." And the entire world, every man, every woman, every child born into this reality, accepted that declaration without question, not because it was true, but because they were never given the chance to remember anything different. This is not a metaphor. This is not mythology dressed up in modern language to comfort the spiritually curious. According to the ancient Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945, this being is real. His name is Yaldabaoth, and his throne sits at the very center of the system that governs your life, your death, and everything that happens in between. The Gnostics were not a single unified church. They were scattered communities of seekers, mystics, and initiates living across the ancient Mediterranean world who shared one radical conviction. The God being worshipped by the masses was not the true God. He was an impostor, a lesser being, a flawed and jealous architect who had constructed the material world as a prison and then convinced his prisoners that their cell was paradise. To understand how Yaldabaoth came to sit upon his throne, you must first understand where he came from. The Gnostic creation story does not begin with a powerful male deity speaking light into existence from a position of supreme authority. It begins with something far more intimate, far more tragic, and far more human. It begins with a mistake made by love. In the highest realm of existence, a place the Gnostics called the pleroma, meaning the fullness, there dwelled pure consciousness, pure light, and a series of divine emanations known as aeons. These aeons existed in perfect balance, each one paired with a complement, together forming a harmonious totality that radiated from the ultimate source of all being. Among these aeons was Sophia, whose name means wisdom, and Sophia, moved by a desire so deep and so sudden that she could not contain it, acted without the consent of her divine partner. She reached beyond the boundaries of the pleroma and attempted to create something on her own. What emerged from that solitary act was not what she intended. What emerged was Yaldabaoth, a being described in the Apocryphon of John as having the face of a lion and the body of a serpent, with eyes that flashed like bolts of lightning. He was born not from divine union, but from an impulse that had not been fully integrated, and so he carried within him, from the very first moment of his existence, a fundamental flawed ignorance. He did not know where he came from. He did not know that above him existed an entire universe of radiant consciousness that dwarfed his own power completely. And because he did not know, he assumed he was alone. He assumed he was supreme. He looked out into the darkness he had inherited and said the words that would define all of human history: "I am a jealous God, and there is no other God beside me." The Gnostics saw in that declaration not the voice of divine authority, but the cry of a frightened and isolated being who had confused his own reflection for the face of God. And yet, despite his ignorance, Yaldabaoth possessed something extraordinary. He had inherited a portion of his mother Sophia's divine light, not by right, but by circumstance of birth. And with that stolen light, he began to build. He created 12 Archons, cosmic rulers aligned with the 12 signs of the zodiac, each one a reflection of a different aspect of his own flawed nature: fear, anger, envy, jealousy, ignorance, and desire, then he created 7 planetary rulers, beings who would govern the layers of reality that surrounded the material world like the layers of an onion, each one a barrier between the trapped human soul and the true light of the pleroma above. And finally, with his Archons assembled and his cosmic machinery in place, Yaldabaoth turned his attention to the creation of the material world itself, a vast and intricate simulation designed not to liberate consciousness, but to contain it. But here is where the story takes a turn that the Gnostics considered the single most important revelation in all of human history. When Yaldabaoth created humanity, something happened that he did not intend. The true God, the ultimate source far above him in the pleroma, breathed a spark of genuine divine light into the human being that Yaldabaoth had fashioned, and in that moment, the prisoner became more powerful than the jailer. The human soul, buried beneath layers of flesh and bone and programming, carried within it something that Yaldabaoth could never touch, never replicate, and never destroy, a fragment of the real light, a direct connection to the true source. This is why the Archons worked so tirelessly to keep humanity asleep. Not because they were evil in some theatrical sense, but because they were afraid. The moment enough human beings remembered what they truly were, the throne of Yaldabaoth would begin to crack. The entire architecture of control, the religions, the cycles of reincarnation, the emotional harvesting, the false afterlife, all of it depended entirely on one thing: human forgetfulness. The Gnostics taught that the Archons maintained this forgetfulness through a series of incredibly sophisticated systems. The first was the material world itself, a realm so saturated with sensation, desire, pain, and pleasure that the soul rarely had a quiet moment in which to ask the deeper questions. Who am I beneath this body? Where did I come from before this life began? What is this presence I sometimes feel in moments of deep silence that seems older than my name and bigger than my story? The second system was religion. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth in all of Gnostic teaching. The Gnostics did not believe that all religion was false. They believed that genuine spiritual impulses had been systematically captured, distorted, and redirected toward the worship of Yaldabaoth, the god of wrath described in certain ancient scriptures, the one who demands obedience, who punishes disobedience, who describes himself as jealous, was not, in the Gnostic understanding, the true God at all. He was the impostor on the throne, and the religions built around his worship, however sincere their followers, were functioning as the most elegant prison architecture ever devised. The third system was karma and reincarnation. Unlike traditions that present the cycle of rebirth as a path of spiritual evolution leading ultimately to liberation, the Gnostics offered a far more disturbing interpretation. Reincarnation, in their view, was not a school. It was a recycling mechanism. Each time a soul died without having awakened to its true nature, it was drawn back into the material world by the weight of its unfinished attachments, its unresolved fears, and the accumulated gravity of a life lived in identification with the false self. The Archons at the gates of death posed as guides, as judges, as beloved ancestors, whatever form was most likely to convince the soul to return. And the soul, still asleep, still forgetting, stepped back into a new body and began the cycle again. What the Gnostics offered against all of this was not a new religion. It was not a set of commandments or a priestly hierarchy or a sacred building to kneel inside. What they offered was direct knowing, what they called Gnosis, the radical personal experience of remembering your own divine origin, not believing it, not being told it by an authority, actually feeling it from the inside as a living reality that no amount of external pressure could ever fully extinguish. They believed that the divine spark within every human being was not metaphorical. It was the single most real thing about you. More real than your name, more real than your memories, more real than the story you have been told about who you are and what this world is and what God wants from you. And they believed that the moment you genuinely remembered that spark, not as a concept, but as a lived recognition, the Archons lost their grip, not because you fought them, but because you stopped feeding them with the one thing they required above all else: your unconscious agreement that Yaldabaoth's world was the only world there was. The throne of the Demiurge was never built from stone. It was built from your forgetting. It was constructed from every moment you accepted the version of reality you were handed without asking where it came from or who it served. It was reinforced by every lifetime lived in fear, in submission, in the exhausting pursuit of things that could never satisfy the hunger of a soul that knows, somewhere beneath the noise, that it does not belong to this world in the way it has been told. But thrones built on illusion are not permanent, and the knowledge the Gnostics preserved in those desert jars, sealed and hidden for 1600 years, was always meant to find its way back. Not to everyone, not all at once, but to the ones who were ready to remember, to the ones who had lived enough lifetimes inside the prison to finally feel, with absolute certainty, that something about the story they had been given was not the whole truth. You are reading these words right now, and that is not an accident. The Gnostics did not write their texts as historical curiosities. They wrote them as maps, precise, urgent, and personal, intended for the soul that had already begun to feel the walls of the prison closing in. They knew that the throne of the Demiurge was not invincible. They knew because they had found the crack in it, not through violence, not through rebellion in the conventional sense, but through the simple and revolutionary act of remembering what they truly were beneath the layers of conditioning, forgetfulness, and fear. Every word you have heard today was placed inside ancient jars and buried beneath the sand, not to be lost, but to survive long enough to reach you. The question the Gnostics leave with every awakening soul is never about the Demiurge. It is always about you. How long will you sit inside a throne room that was never built for your liberation and mistake its golden walls for home? If something in this video stirred a recognition you cannot quite name, that quiet feeling that the story you have been given about God, about death, about who you are, has always been missing something essential, then you are already further along the path than you know. Subscribe to this channel and stay close, because what is coming next goes even deeper into the hidden architecture of the reality you were born into. The texts are still speaking. The knowledge is still alive. And the throne of the Demiurge has always had one weakness: a human soul that remembers the light it came from and refuses, once and for all, to forget again.